Look, I'm Dave.
And I'm Anton, of course. Who
There we
else can
go.
I be?
See, okay, good. Yeah. Look, it is all fun. Anton and I don't get to hang out as often as we used to, but when we do, we have incredibly critical things to talk about. Isn't that right?
Yes, incredibly critical. This is the hottest news of 2008, I think.
Yeah. So look, we went back and forth a little bit on this topic, and obviously we sort of try to come up with immediately relevant topics, things that are of the minute, cutting edge. Where are people going? And what we realized is that, certainly there are a lot of really interesting things happening in the realm of cloud today, and certainly even in the realm of cloud security. But there's this, but dot 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 that sort of goes alongside that. That's really what we want to talk about. And so I'm going to let Anton kick this one off because, again, Google has, like a lot of research around this. Anton's talking about this all the time. And I think he can probably set the stage better than I can to really introduce the topic of our discussion here today. So take it away for a second, Anton. Let's let everybody know what's going on here.
I mean, it's the damn Groundhog. I think it's his fault. But ultimately, when we started looking at some of the things we observe in security, say with AI adoption, challenges with securing AI agents in the near future or in the present, we noticed that a lot of things that haunt these amazing new technologies and how we secure it are the things that we've seen before. And in case of Dave and me, as being like so old, we've seen them before multiple times. I definitely was not born for the mainframe to PC transition, or mainframe to server transition, rather. Maybe Dave was born back then. I don't know. Like, I don't want to judge. But, some of the lessons certainly go back to the 70s and the misconfiguration, password authentication challenges. We are seeing current data, and we are seeing data that applies to cloud and AI. The tidbit of data here from our Cloud Threat Horizons report does remind us that we still see misconfigurations and credential practices. And we've been doing this particular report since 21. So this is 25. It's almost 4.5 years. And some of the things just don't change. They change a little bit. We introduce new security improvements, and certain things die, certain problems die, certain classes of attacks die. But they die really slowly. And in many environments, they stay alive, almost like one of those Windows NT 4.0 boxes in your closet. They just don't die fast enough. And we also see that in many cases, the security teams just reach for the same tools to secure new problems. And in light of what I just said, it sounds like, well, guess what? I have old problems, so I should go get old tools. It's not entirely true, though. And one of the themes for the presentation was that you'll see in a moment would be that certainly many things repeat. Many old problems come and haunt us with new technologies, whether it's cloud and AI. But we're also seeing excessive reliance on very outdated tools and practices. And to me, maybe it proliferates some of the problems. After all, if we fail to fix a certain problem with old tools, doubling down may not be an answer. So why not use modern tools and practices?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, and before we get into some of the specifics that we want to get into, and talk about here, in which we have several by far, and certainly, of course, there's an associated white paper that goes along with this talk too, that has lots of details and things that we don't have the time to cover today. It's kind of interesting to look back and say, okay, specifically in cloud, what have we learned? Since this really took off and people started building things in the cloud and started shifting traditional, on-premises workloads into the cloud. And I do think there's some good news. This is certainly not intended to be a doom and gloom presentation here at all. I think there's better awareness of cybersecurity controls and frameworks and architectural patterns and models across the landscape. I think some of the problems that tend to happen naturally are people just moving too fast. They get sprawl. People, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, sort of thing. And so I think there's a lot of themes there that we'll sort of touch upon as we go through these various discussion areas. But it's not all bad. To bring back to Anton as we sort of move into this, I think personally, this is just me stating it, I think you could build a vastly more secure infrastructure in the cloud today than we probably ever could in the past in an on-premises environment. Just saying, I think, if you know what you're doing and you've got everybody on board with that design, and there's oversight and so on and so on and so on. I think we have a better opportunity to have improved cybersecurity in pretty much every area in the cloud. And I think there was a lot of hesitance in the community around that concept, and has been that way for a long time. But I find, talking to students in my classes and clients that I work with, that people are starting to feel that way. I really do. I think people are starting to come around and say, wait, maybe, just because it was this old way that we did it, that doesn't mean it was good. So, let's yeah, to your point, Anton, let's try something fresh, right? Let's do something fresh and start thinking that way.
And we'll go through a few domains and contrast some of the classics and why they still work sometimes and where they clearly don't, and where things would really harm you if you go for the familiar. So let's go.
Yep.
I mean, IAM is our favorite subject to hate. So we'll just start with that, eat the frog right away, and then deal with the fun stuff like detection and response.
Well, I love that we started it off with IAM, because I would say, just personal experience here, IAM is the place that I don't know that anybody's going to say they feel like they have it wholly captured, and that they've got it 100% right. I feel like it's still just this absolute struggle for organizations to get their arms around this, in the cloud. And I think some of that stems from the fact that, well, look, let's just be honest here. I don't think a lot of organizations were good at it in the first place. I mean, a lot of organizations were never good at IAM in any form or fashion, irrespective of, sort of the forum in which they were doing it. And I think that just kind of came right along with them into the cloud. But I think what I try to emphasize with organizations is that, look, everything in the cloud has an identity. Everything. I mean, literally everything. So it's services, it's objects, it's you name it. It's all got identity. And I think that's intimidating, right? That's where I think that's what happens is it's intimidating. And so people just sort of, I want to say, clickety click their way through until they get things that work. And you end up with this blah of identity and access management policy and, interrelationships and things like that. Has sort of been my experience around it.
Yeah. And I think that the legacy is kind of a curse word, and it's really not meant to be that in this case. It's just like factually things that are just old practices, things that are kind of, maybe made total sense back in the day, but now they look really odd. And I want to add two things. One is specific to the fact that cloud IAM in many regards is different, and my esteemed colleague from Microsoft pointed out that, say, identity is the center of zero trust, and it's of course a very enlightened and ultimately correct view. But this means that if you're tied to mid-90s identity in your approach, a lot of zero trusty things will be kind of hard, and a lot of cloud will be hard. And my Mandiant colleagues here remind us that mistakes with on-premise identity can ruin your cloud experience in quite a few cases. Think about syncs, think about federation of all sorts, think about a long list of other scenarios where they've, a few years ago, pointed out that a lot of cloud breaches happen because of on-prem IAM. And I thought, wait a second, no. And they said, yep, that's what happens. And this to me was an eye-opener, where the old world comes and bites your new beautiful world in the appropriately sensitive spot.
Hey, that's a really good point, because look, if you do have a continual sync between the old, which is maybe your traditional on-prem AD, and you're syncing it all out into the cloud, and look, you're bringing you're bringing the struggle right out there, right? Meaning, hey, look, you may have somebody that's compromised your on-premises infrastructure. They do some shenanigans in your AD, and now you have it in the cloud as well, right? So I think that's exactly right. And look, it's interesting to me about AD, and I don't mean to pick on AD. Everybody probably has some form of directory service, and 99% of it tends to be AD. So there you go. But that's a model that worked when you had a contained infrastructure that was largely hierarchical, and it was sort of wholly oriented around these grouping mechanisms for traditional users, and maybe some computer objects and things. That just doesn't naturally transcend into the way that cloud objects and cloud services interact and work and functionally work. And so I think there's still some applicability there. I mean, I really do. You still got users, and you still have to apply, some sort of policy to them in a lot of ways. But, I think that, the concept of IAM in the cloud, actually, the way I think of IAM in the cloud, right? So the old joke of, is it DNS? It's DNS. It's always DNS. It's always IAM. in the cloud, it's always IAM that's the struggle. And I've done enough assessments of people's cloud environments to realize that we do bring a lot of those kind of old school mentalities into the cloud around IAM. Like it's not just users. In fact, for the vast majority of your, kind of core cloud oriented IAM, it shouldn't be users at all, right? I mean, it's not normal. It's not human beings that you're talking about here. You're talking about asset to asset or service to service or API based identities and things of that nature that I think, again, traditional identity people, they have to adapt to that, and they're not necessarily there yet.
Yeah, and we have the trickiest one on the next slide, right? The one that has the extra challenges with classic IAM, where they assume it's a human or occasional account for a service, and suddenly this baby shows up, and well, that's your face on the right.
Yeah. Well, look, you've got a real problem when Gartner invents an acronym for it. And so like here we are, right? Because that means that somebody can productize said acronym and offer solutions that purport to solve the problem. We've seen this movie before. We know how it tends to end. And this concept of the non-human identity has very much sort of transcended its way into the product space and to, some of the, cloud entitlement management and those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, what you have to look at is the fact that the vast majority of the cloud identities are, in fact, non-human. Call them machine identities if you want to. I don't know if that's necessarily 100% accurate, but it is non-human identities. And so I think you have to start thinking about inventorying differently, because just because it's not a human doesn't mean that it couldn't be hijacked and leveraged in ways that you don't want it to be. And so I think, there does need to be some mapping of what needs to talk to what, not who needs to talk to what, but what needs to talk to what, and finding that core theme of least privilege and, so forth, and manifesting it in this way. And here's the thing. You have the tools to do this now. This is my whole take. There are tools.
I mean, this is like, we are in this relatively short period of good news, by the way, because of what Dave said. To avoid being, oh yeah, these guys, they're giving a 2017 presentation, I want to remind everybody that in this exact context where for most organizations, AI agents would materialize, they would imagine that for some of the IAM experts, the arrival of AI agents would be like, right in their backyard, an alien ship would land, and something would come out of it, and you like, deal with it. I've noticed some kind of like LinkedIn influencer style security expert who hand waved once and said, for agents, you should do IAM right. And I'm like, yeah, dude, what does it even mean? We don't know. Like, I'm looking at some of our documents about how certain things work internally with agents, and some of them have June, July dates, which means we figured it out, not in 2015 like we did Zero Trust, but we figured it out a few weeks ago, and certain decisions were made fairly recently. The agents being humans or not being humans, even that is a debate. I've done a LinkedIn poll a few weeks ago, so I guess that makes me a LinkedIn influencer as well, where I asked, hey, IAM people, do you think an AI agent is a human or like a user or more like a workload identity? It was a 60-40 split on something that's in theory is like so foundational that we should know it, but we don't. So if you go with optimists like Dave, who said, yeah, right now we have tools, you'd be right. Right now we have tools, and we have the good news slide that we'll see in a moment, but bad news are coming, and it will be very fun to deal with some things that are quite alien in a similar way as cloud was alien to an on-prem people. AI agents would be alien to the current batch of IAM people. This is kind of fun for me, it's fun. Hey, but it's also quite tricky. And we are now dealing with a lot of people who are starting to struggle with this and who start to decide what to do and how to control things and how to limit privilege, how to do dynamic authorization, how to do all these exciting novel IAM things in an extra novel environment. Okay, I'll shut up about AI. I think
no.
done my drinking game.
I don't think that's it. I mean, because look, I think it's important to look backwards just as much as it is forwards to go, well, where were mistakes made? If we're not learning lessons along the way, what are we doing? And in the realm of IAM, I think it really is tricky because a lot of security professionals in a variety of disciplines, whatever they may be, right? Architectural and whatever capacity and so forth, really didn't have a lot to do with identity management in the past, right? It was sort of this niche area that
Hmm.
was very much managed by people that were largely focused on things like provisioning, deprovisioning, and lifecycle management for human beings. Like that's really what it was focused around, and it was tied to human resources, and so that was what it was about. And it's not at all what it is about now, right? It's interrelationships across a software-defined ecosystem, and you got to get your head around that. There's policy language, there's syntax, there's technical aspects to these things. And I tell people all the time, I get asked all the time, like, well, what should I learn if I'm trying to get into cloud security? And I'm like, well, you would do yourself a real favor if you started with IAM. Really, you would, because it's the underlying groundwork to pretty much everything. And it does absolutely come back into zero trust. The whole concept of zero trust. I think it's much more about identity today than around things like networking and so forth.
Yep.
And we'll touch on a little bit of that too. But look, if you got IAM under control, you're in a much better position to build a secure infrastructure and maintain it in an ongoing fashion. But you might need help, and that's the factor, because you do have a lot more identities, and that's natural, and it's actually expected in the cloud. You're not going to have 4 policies that apply to everything. It's just not going to work that way. You might have hundreds of policies. I know organizations that have thousands of policies, and the minute you start getting into triple and quadruple digits on the number of policies, people's heads start to explode. You might need some help. And so that's the good news, is that you have to embrace cloud oriented and cloud native solutions that are better around this, right? I mean, and I would actually say, look, I'm the last person to come to a forum like this and start pushing products or start pushing product categories or things that are going to cost you money. But if there was one where I'm like, look, you got to budget this stuff, whatever it costs, however it's going to manifest, whether you're using tools like Recommender, or whether you're going out and looking at the suite of CIM, kind of tools, you need to think about this, because it's only going to help you in the long run, right? I mean, really, I think this is a place where if you felt like you could look at one another in the eye and say, we've got a pretty good handle on this, and everybody's invested, and we kind of know what we have, and we know what we're building, and we have life cycles and approaches, I think we're going to feel that the other pieces aren't nearly as difficult to tackle going forward. And if you even look at this as a pillar of zero trust, which it is, in the cloud, how are you going to accommodate for this in a manual fashion? You're not. There's no way you're going to get there without automation.
And by the way, we won't be a good card-carrying members of security community if we wouldn't tone down the really good news Dave presented with a tiny bit of bad news. And the tiny bit of bad news here is multi-cloud. When I was at Gartner, some of you know I was an analyst, there was a piece written by a peer team to mine, which was a solution comparison for IAM capabilities in AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure. It's I've yesterday for this discussion, I've dug out a modern version of that document, and I find a really nice, really tight Gartner document with that title, and it has 69 pages, which is enormous for a Gartner document. For those of you who read a lot of research from my former colleagues, you know that they tend to stick to under 10 pages. This baby is 69 pages, and it's a really beautiful example of the fact that if you learn IAM from one of us being 3 providers at the exchange, you've learned only a small percentage of IAM that applies to the other 2 of us. And the Gartner people, being really intelligent in this, managed to work really hard. The sizable team of people worked really hard, and it distilled all the differences to 69 pages. So if you learn IAM in the cloud, you should really know which cloud. And if you learn IAM in all 3 clouds, you're probably going to be like extremely valuable to a lot of people on this planet. We should switch topics. IAM is fun, but we've prayed to IAM gods enough, I think.
I think you're right, but I don't disagree with you. I mean, it's hard. IAM is hard. We're not going to simplify it. You're not going to walk away from this with some magical solution for all of it. It takes work, and it takes work in every cloud you're in. So fair point. All right, let's tackle another really easy one, like data. Right. So let's
Great. You would say that now, would you?
Well, look, and you might get the idea if you're hanging out with us right now that Anton and I are sort of hitting at least some of the areas that are pillars of zero trust, because it is a model that people are adopting today. And if nothing else, use it as a backdrop. for things you're thematically thinking about in the cloud. But look, we've had these problems for years, irrespective of where you are. Again, you're on premises. Where's your data? Well, we kind of know. Do you know where the sensitive stuff is? Sort of. That came with us to the cloud too. Some of that came with us, but honestly, here's the thing that I tend to have found is that it's very easy. And I think this is the case really in most of the leading providers, certainly in Google and I'd say for Microsoft and for Amazon and everybody. It's really easy to spin up storage nodes in the cloud. It really just is. And so, you've got storage that's sort of, part and parcel to workload access. You've got things that are hosted solely for storage sake alone. You've got, components of application architectures and infrastructure. It's tied into everything. And so, if you can clickety-click your way, I mean, obviously, if you're automating things as you should be, you're not clickety-clicking anything other than parts of your DevOps pipeline that are pushing the stuff in. But it's so easy to create storage. I think people have done it fast. And so data just goes blat and it's out there. And people have screwed this up. I mean, back to the origins of this presentation. I mean, we are our own worst enemy in this case. And if you don't know where it is and how it's configured, it can lead to a lot of problems down the road. That's sort of been the problem we've had for years now in the cloud.
Yes, and I think this is the fun part, is because I would say this area is the area where things have gotten, in terms of tooling, things have gotten dramatically better. And you may, the pessimist in the room may be like, Anton, you're saying it because you're a cloud provider. Well, work for one. But no, the improvement in tools here, everything's encrypted. How about that? You don't need to debate with some millions of data center admins about if this server is encrypted. If you come to our cloud, and again, my Google hat is back there behind the virtual background. If you come to our cloud and to many other leading clouds, everything's encrypted. There's no real need to debate. We can debate who has the keys, and that's a useful debate to have. There are options, but the point is encryption is universal. That's it. It's done. Encryption problems of the 80s, 90s, 70s, whatever other years are solved. It's fixed. Full green checkbox. It's done. Data proliferation, yeah, sure, data proliferates, but data discovery tools are really good in all three cloud providers. In my analyst days, I've looked at what Amazon has, what Azure has, what Google has. Of course, I'm not current on the other two, but I can tell you that these tools are really good. They're robust. They can find the data you want. They can find sensitive data. You can use them and you will find what you want. Encryption, there's a lot of advances in automated data classification. Some of it is Gen AI powered. Some of it is previous generation of AI powered. I would say that from the list here, three top things on the list are just dramatically better in the cloud. There, almost nobody would argue that, no, I want my DLP appliance. It's better than what Google has. That's quite insane. We can briefly debate the last point. I think the last point to me is the mix of good news and bad news. Because, and the bad news, well, they're kind of a little bit self-inflicted, but they're there. If I do want granular access control, some of the tools to automate applying and maintaining, the maintaining part is hard, granular access controls to data are pretty much coming now. Like it's not something that I can point at DLP and say, yeah, we built that thing in 2016 or whatever. Some of this is already much better than what you had on-prem. So instead of bringing your DLP appliance as a virtual appliance to the cloud, use what cloud providers have. And the access controls are rapidly improving to simplify running anything but, here you have data. Allow access to data. Yes, no. I want it. Yes. Okay, check. I have the data. Like, no, you don't do this. You've never, it was never right. But in the cloud, these three things are much better. And the fourth thing is getting better rapidly and probably better in many regards today.
Yeah, I think that's fair because look, I've always told people, look, let's just get practical about it. You can't hide anything in the cloud. You just can't. And I jokingly always said, well, you can create any sort of object or asset in the cloud that you want, but it's attached to the cloud fabric. And somewhere, somehow, the providers are going to want you to pay for it. So they know about it. You can know about it if you know how to ask the right questions. I think the data comes right along with that, truthfully. And it's a matter of knowing, the nodes that there's in and, the geographies in which it's stored and all that kind of fun stuff. I think you have a good point there, though. I do think the first three things that are listed here, I mean, there's no question whatsoever encryption is easier in the cloud than it ever has been anywhere else. There's just not even a question about it. Anybody that's tried to implement like an enterprise class PKI, forget it. Like, come on now. I think the automated discovery aspects that lead to things like classification and tagging and tracking, and then, basically the sort of facilitating DLP by virtue of all that is 100% getting better and done. Yeah. So, I mean, look, we've been talking about the concept of continuous monitoring forever, but it's been impossible. You can do it now. I mean, you really can. It's always there. It's always known. It's always tracked. But to the point that you just made a minute ago, the robust access controls do feel like a little bit of an overlay that hasn't wholly woven itself into the other three yet. But it's getting there. I do think that it's getting there. I'm a reluctant optimist, but frankly, that almost takes us right back to the identity discussion, and we're not going back. So just know.
Yes,
I think that is getting better. But look, we're all learning lessons as we go. I definitely think that embracing cloud native. Truthfully, I really believe this. Embracing cloud native, if you're moving into any cloud with these aspects, are basically requirements. They should be functional requirements to moving into the cloud versus, well, do we really want to do it or not?
Yes, and I think this is ultimately something that people would decide en masse to go with cloud native tools, to go with cloud provider tools, cloud native tools. In this case, it's kind of almost secondary whether we build them or a third-party modern provider who knows cloud build them. But the point is that they are cloud native tools. They are not virtual appliances reborn. That's not going to fly. It's not going to cut it. It will return you straight to the groundhog and he will eat you. Okay, I'm mixing metaphors. Let's just switch gears.
Well, no, but I think that's fair, right? I mean, especially around this. This particular topic, of course, near and dear to my heart. I started in the realm of networking, and so I sort of look at this and go, everything looks like an IP address or a subnet or or a firewall or whatever. I think those conceptually are in the cloud, but the way we did it before, it just doesn't transcend. I mean, it just doesn't. I mean, like big flat networks, come on. Having so it's interesting that we're talking about this because I'm finishing up a project with a client right now where I did a firewall audit. And it just brought me screaming back to like the old days of, oh my gosh, I have all these rules that have just kind of built upon one another over years and years and years, and different admins did that and this, and we have naming conventions, and it became cluttered because it just kind of stacked on top of itself for so long, and people didn't know where things were and so forth. And that's no knock against anybody. I mean, firewalls are, I would consider, like a must-have technology stack element for security. But if you're designing a perimeter structure or a model, I think it's important to note that the nature of perimeterization has definitely changed in the cloud. And trying to bring the old hub and spoke DMZ architecture models with you. Look, if it's what you need, this is the way I always say to people, like if it's what you need to get to like a lift and shift, and it's like a transitional model that you put into place just so that you're not driving yourself crazy operationally or what have you, then I don't think anybody can knock that, but it's not your long-term strategy. I don't think that necessarily works well here.
I think that you're exactly right, and I think the transitional state for some of this on-prem network security contracts is fine. But what I observed sometimes is when people, I would say somewhat in good faith, say that it's the phase one, they don't ever get to phase two. So watch for this particular risk. If you look at all these beautiful cloud native architectures and modern things built in the last 10 years by a lot of smart people, and you think, yeah, I should probably do this, but let me just lift and shift first and replicate my infrastructure, and that's phase one, I'll migrate slowly out of it. A decent percentage of people never do. So if you humorously pointed out that you're going to bring firewall appliance to the cloud for now, and everybody's like, yeah, okay, for now it's fine, but it's just going to be bad over time, and you say, yep, it's going to be bad over time, I'll change. Many organizations never change that. And this to me is what the risk I would watch for. So if it's okay as a transitional state, if you mean it. If you plan to be stuck with on-prem architectures, you'll be overspending, under-securing, over-securing. You'd be both overspending, under-securing, and over-securing at the same time in the wrong spots. And to me, that's what kills it. I feel like the jokes about, hey, do you want to bring firewall appliances to the cloud? They're really funny 5 years ago. You'd assume people would look at you like you're weird if you make this joke now. But unfortunately, people still do it today. People still bring virtual firewall appliance to the cloud and then hope for the best. Yeah, Dave knows more about this.
Well, no, I mean, look, like I said, I think you're sort of right. People probably do lie to themselves. Like, surely we'll be out of this in 2 to 3 years, right? Here's our transition plan, and so on and so on. But then they don't, right? So 7 years later, they've just sort of kept building things around that, and the technology has matured. And I think if we were having this conversation, I laugh when you started to like, is this a 2017 talk? Well, if it was, we would probably be saying like, oh, okay, it's going to help you get there, people, right? It's 2017. It's probably about time that you got into the cloud. Let's go, and if you need that, if it's like your whoopee, your safety blanket that makes you feel comfortable, bringing it along with you. And look, the other thing too, and I see both sides of this. If it allows you to have centralized operational management from continuity standpoint, okay, but down the road, it's going to start to become cumbersome. I mean, it really just does. And one of the things that I've certainly run into, and I think a lot of organizations have run into, is the lack of sort of old school traditional firewalling and network security integration into much more cloud native workload strategies, right? As you decide, hey, look, we're doing serverless infrastructure. How in the world are you going to apply old school networking and security policies to any of that? It just doesn't even work. And that's why I think you have to look. I mean, and maybe you're not there. If you're just running a bunch of virtual machines in the cloud and you have, sort of like a very simplistic model and strategy, then this will work, at least for the time being. But at some point, somebody in your DevOps organization is going to go, well, it's probably about time that we explore things like Kubernetes and container-oriented clustering and serverless and things that just don't work there at all, right? And you've got to start looking at other technologies and things that are much more deeply woven into the fabric of the cloud themselves before you can start having that. I think the other thing, and I'll speak, again, somebody that lived this life for a pretty long time, the notion of assets being not only tracked but managed through things like IP addresses is going away. I mean, it's kind of gone already, but you can.
It's gone. You may not have noticed it in some environments that are replicas of on-prem, but yes, yeah. It's gone.
Yeah, those old school IP mapping like spreadsheets and things that people, number one, nobody loves those things, so let's get rid of them anyway. But like they're gone. They're going. It's time to start embracing, things like tags as a means of identification, and like metadata based identity, and you look at everything that we list here, and it's like, all right, this is the way. This is what people need to start embracing. You have the tools. You have pretty much everything you could possibly need to create the layer that's network centric here. Again, this is a pillar of zero trust. It is something that's still needed, but I would, honestly say, just going back in contrast to where we started this discussion, if we sort of saw like a 50-50 split between identity and network in the old days, it's not a 50-50 split anymore. It's definitely more like an 80-20 split with identity and maybe the 20% for networking. And if I'm looking forward, I think it's at least the old school model of networking, that 20% is going down. It just is. Yeah. Keep everybody out of your house that you don't want. But once you're in there, you need to start looking at tools like this, right? You need to look at flow logging that's there. You need to look at microsegmentation, and microsegmentation is 100% the way, particularly the minute you move away from traditional virtual machine workloads. I mean, there's just no question about it whatsoever. Yep. You need to start looking at like different types of fabric solutions, and so forth. And you have encrypted tunnels. I mean, anything you need, you got it. So to me, I think we have all those tools. It's just a matter of planning to shift away from the traditional perimeterization strategies network-wise that we've had in the past. And so this is a call for all of the networking people that are here today. Start planning this. Some of you probably have.
Yeah, and I think microseg specifically was at one point when people discussed it in a separate manner, maybe 5, 7, maybe 10 years ago, it was just seen as daunting and almost nobody did it. Startups have died. Today, we certainly see it as the part of what Google call beyond prod, the kind of like a zero trust for production workloads. But for me, microsegmentation done well has to be married to zero trust approach, because it can't be I'm just going to manage 1 million firewall rules for every machine. No, that's not what you do. Like it would go back to unfortunate reality of 5, 7 years ago when people tried just brute force through microseg and didn't succeed. A lot of other components here are important. I mean, flow login, VPN. I'm almost cringe that they've mentioned the VPN, because it's just such an anti-pattern in a zero trust environment. But it's also a fact that when you extend on-premise networks to cloud, you have some benefits, but you also, of course, pay a horrible cost in some circumstances, including for incidents. So it's kind of there are more cloud native ways to do it than a VPN. And as my story goes, and this kind of a quick side trip, then when I joined Google in 2019, after working for other companies for quite some time, I was handed a laptop, and of course the laptop did not have a VPN client. And for me, I just had this kind of like epiphany like moment. It's like, oh my God, all this zero trust stuff I read about, it's real. And I looked completely weird. Everybody looked at me and was like, what? Why is Anton so excited? Like, and I'm like, my laptop doesn't have a VPN client. And people are like, yeah, we didn't use VPNs since 2015. What are you talking about? And I'm like, the fact that you are so calm and mundane about it, and it's like a ginormous 100,000 person company hasn't used a VPN for 5 years and everything is fine, in fact, better, was a huge eye-opener. And I still gush about it, even though it was 6 years ago. But it's kind of a fact that zero trust is real, and it is not a marketing buzzword, but it has been quite unattainable for a lot of companies. Okay, I digress. And in fact, I'm not going to give Wes's presentation. He's given a good presentation on this already. So.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. And so look, I do want to make one comment. I saw that there were some questions coming in around, like, well, what is the replacement for firewalls? I don't know that we're advocating completely to replace firewalls in their entirety. I think we're talking about replacing the modality of firewalls and the, sort of the form, like the virtual appliance structure of firewalls. I don't think that's sustainable. I think you need something that is more cloud native. And your opinions of cloud native firewalls will obviously differ. I don't think we're here to necessarily debate that, but I do think that we have to look forward. I don't think that saying, hey, look, we're going to just drag these things kicking and screaming in here. And maybe it's a third party that's more of like a SASE type of option where you're integrating across fabrics. It's in the cloud, it's for the cloud. And in fact, that's definitely the direction that a lot of the like sort of traditional firewall providers are going. And they're all partners across all of the cloud providers that are here today. So, there you go. That is the way. Let's keep going.
And sometimes I would point my one liner on this is firewalls are out, but firewalling is in. You would use firewalling. You want the security groups. You want other features that all three cloud providers have for limited network access. So to me, firewalls as boxes are out, but firewalling as network access is not out. Okay, fun part. Yeah. The vulnerabilities is a cringe-worthy topic. So let's cringe briefly.
Mm-hmm. Let's do it. I mean, so look, so to me, I don't think we need a whole lot of introduction to this one. This is the devil people know. I mean, the lack of patching, poorly configured workloads, and runtime threats. I mean, that's life as we know it. I think the one that stands out here for me that's a little bit newer and more different for a lot of sort of traditional security is the APIs, right? Like hooking things in and basically exposing different surface areas than people are accustomed to with the workloads that we're deploying. And I certainly see more of that. I mean, again, to sort of take the traditional VMs and push those to the side a little bit. I think the minute you get into more cloud native workload models, APIs are they're part and parcel to how they function, right? They have to be there for a lot of reasons. I mean, you cannot operate Kubernetes services without having a significant number of APIs accessible through, your management infrastructure and services. And so that can be woefully exposed if people don't know what they're doing and they're trying to apply legacy models to this stuff, right? I mean, you're not going to just slap an agent on everything and go, oh, we're safe now, right? And the nature of velocity, I think, has to be mentioned here. You might have had systems that lived on-prem for years. That's just not happening anymore. Things are changing. You've got hourly updates to workloads, sometimes less than that. And what that means is there needs to be more of a consistent, management and security pattern baked into the way they operate in the first place.
Yes, and I think that on the separation wall here is in many cases just hits in a very interesting dimension. We, by the way, only have a few minutes, but this one is too much fun to ignore. And of course, we have the DNR to get to. I feel like the modern vulnerability management requires modern IT. You cannot have modern vulnerability management in classic IT, in legacy IT. In my Gartner days, I called it the patch and sound barrier. Your plane cannot go faster than sound barrier if IT is put together a certain way. People can scream at you, people can threaten you with government regulations. If you can do 30 days, you maybe can do 22 days. If they say patch in 3 days, you can't. There's no way to do it unless your IT changes dramatically. So to me, cloud-style IT, DevOps, modern agile practices does allow you to speed up vulnerability management and make it almost invisible and effective. But if you stick to on-prem IT in the cloud, you're kind of stuck. You're stuck with all the classic problems on a potentially more exposed environment. So to me, this is kind of good news, meaning that if you do change a lot, you get good news. If you change a little, you get mostly bad news.
Yeah, well, and I think that's right. But again, it's you got to bake this stuff in, right? It's got to be part of the processes. Yes. And I think, to your point, vulnerability management and configuration management need to be baked in very early in any update cycles for basically everything that we're talking about here. And there needs to be buy-in from everybody, right? So you can't just go fetch something out of like Docker Hub and sling it into production and hope for the best. There needs to be some scrutiny and so forth. But it's not that hard to do. Workload protection, not only standalone platforms and third-party solutions, but even a lot of the baked-in things in the cloud are vastly better than they ever have been. But somebody's got to be in charge of this, and you have to operationalize these types of things to ensure that, number one, the people building cool stuff are happy, and number two, that there's that continuous scrutiny of what's there and making sure that, hey, you're not pushing vulnerable things into production and so forth. But you can do this. I do see this getting better, though. I really do. I do see that workload security is improving. I think the technologies are moving rapidly towards a relative state of maturity. And I think people are really, because like I said, this is the devil people know, right? People understand, like, okay, we got to lock this stuff down. And I see some improvements there. But if you're still clinging to some of the old school, like lift and shift things, just start looking forward. You do have to start moving towards more of an automated mechanism and set of processes that that everybody's tied into.
Yep.
All right, so let's finish strong. I know we only have a couple minutes here before we're done, but let's talk a little bit about detection and response. I think we can hit this one pretty quick, right? I mean, well, actually, we could probably spend an hour on this one. But,
yeah, this is a separate presentation. What are you talking about? This is an opener for the next hour between Anton and Dave. But this is. I'm going to be contrarian, and I'm going to say this is mostly good news. Yes, if you squint, you would see bad news. This person here on the picture made by AI clearly is not squinting. But the point is that talent gap, changes in logs, changes in telemetry, you can see them as bad news, but they're really mostly good news if you learn them. I used to kind of quip that to learn cloud, to secure cloud, you need to know cloud. It sounds kind of very Captain Obvious, but I also see a lot of people who try to secure cloud without caring to understand cloud. So to me, DNR is mostly on the this is a way to get out of Groundhog Day. You do not get a server in the closet in the cloud because the asset APIs are reliable. You get to use them, but if you use them, you do have much better visibility. You have a lot better tooling. A lot of at least 2 of the C cloud providers built really robust SIEM products that can do effective detection, threat intel, do many things automatically, and do them at maybe not low cost, but lower cost compared to on-prem tools. So to me, DNR is mostly in the good news bucket, because the bad news are kind of about learning and adaptation in a somewhat critical areas, but also not without oh yeah, throw everything you knew, now it's completely different. No, it's not like that. It's more about here are the differences, learn the differences, and here are the advantages, you can make use of them. This may be my optimistic look, but I'm also been living that life for quite some time.
I agree. And look, all I'll say is you got all the data in one place, and you can do better things with that data than you ever have out of the cloud. And number three, you can automate lots of playbooks and workflows around that because it's a software-based construct to begin with. So great, all good news. We'll leave everybody with this. I know we're getting ready to hand it off to Frank and crew to have a panel discussion, but I'd like to just plug the white paper that actually goes along with this. This is a very, very abbreviated list of some of the recommendations we've got in there, and there's a lot more detail that takes these themes and concepts that we just discussed and really breaks it out into like very specific things that everybody can consider to do in each of these sort of categorical areas. So I'll leave everybody with that. But Anton, as always, it's been a lot of fun hanging out.
Same here.
And thanks everybody for listening.